Hi, everyone. This is David Cohen, and I'm here with my amazing co-host,
Brad Feld.
Hey, Brad. And this is the Give First podcast. And in the startup world, Give First means simply trying to help anyone, especially entrepreneurs, without any expectation of getting anything back. So we'll be talking to mentors and founders about what Give First looks like in action and how it makes great entrepreneurship possible. We polled everyone, and they said consistently that their favorite part of the show was the legal mumbo jumbo. So here it is. The following discussion is an expression of personal opinion and does not represent the opinion of Techstars or any company we discuss. Our conversations for informational purposes only, including any mention of securities or funds. This is not legal, business, investment, or tax advice, and is not intended for use by any investor. Certain of Techstars funds own or may own in the future securities in some of the companies discussed in this podcast. Got it? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another year, another decade, Brad, of Give First.
It's actually not a new decade until December 31st, 2020. But
give me the geeky stuff. Why is that?
January 1st, 2021 would be the beginning of the new decade. I don't know. I read the Farmer's Almanac, and that's what it says.
Oh, okay. I thought you had some technicality or something you were going
to. No, it's a classic programmer's fence post problem, and I think most people think that 2020 January 1st is the beginning, but it's actually January 1st, 2021.
It's like base 0, base 1 kind of issue.
There you go.
I was just coding, which should scare the hell out of you, and I had that exact issue. I decided I was going to code some this year because I haven't coded much in like 10 years. And it's totally useless what I'm creating, but it's very fun. And I just had that base 0 problem.
Are you programming in Visual Basic?
No, it's PHP. Come on.
Oh, you've made progress.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, 20 episodes in. This is our little recap, I guess. 20 episodes of Give First. That's pretty cool.
It's fun.
Awesome guests.
I've heard from a bunch of my podcast friends that people typically don't make it past number 5. So we've made it to 20.
We've quadrupled all of their expectations. It's amazing. Well, one of the guests that we had, Harry Stebbings, he said that you just got to keep going, and he's done thousands. And he said,
Harry's at 9,200, 307 or something.
Exactly.
That was a completely made up number.
By the time you hear this, it'll be that far. But let's talk through a few of the guests we've had in the last, 6 or 8 episodes. Harry was one of them. Harry had never done a podcast. He was so nervous. I thought it was really funny.
It was pretty awesome. Normally, when Harry does a podcast, and I've been on the 20-minute VC a few times, he sends you a bunch of questions and a script, and he's super, super prepared. And of course, within 3 minutes, when he and I start doing something, we immediately go off script, and it's way off whatever he was planning. I kept waiting before the one we did with him, or that you did with him. I kept waiting to see that long thing from him that says, here's what I want to talk about, and here's exactly how it's going to go every 3 minutes. But that never showed up.
Which was cool because he said, I've never been on this side of the microphone. I've never actually done an interview on a podcast, and we had very little plan, as you and I like to do, and we just kind of talked to him about, what he's learned over the years and some of his favorite episodes, and it was really fun to hear it. So if you haven't checked that episode out, I definitely would. Another one that was kind of different that I thought was really fun that we did recently was Josh Hicks of Plated, which we sort of recorded live. I don't know how you have a live podcast, but that's what we called it, at the Blackstone Launchpad, the Propel event in New York. So that was really fun to do live.
Some of the stuff when I listened to the podcast that you did with Josh, the whole discussion about being an introverted leader really, really rang true. And I thought he was very articulate about not just how he personally dealt with it, but how he worked with his co-founder with it, and how it really impacted things as the business evolved.
Yeah, it's sort of the boss versus leader, right, versus manager thing. And I think, he started out much like I did, just, programmer on the tech side, and, learned a lot as that company grew like crazy. So that was a fun one to do with all the college students there. We had probably 300 students in the room, and, they asked a bunch of questions afterwards, and we captured most of that for you. So that's a fun one too. Any that you remember that stand out?
We did two last year with, or in the last half of last year with people who have really, really long relationship with. One that you did and one that I did. The one that you did was with Heidi Roizen, who I was partners with at Mobius Venture Capital for a long time. And we spent tons of time working together. When I was in the Bay Area, I would typically stay at her house and live with her family during this time period between 1999 and 2006 or 2007. I had a room in her house in Atherton, and it was fun to listen to her talk. We haven't really worked closely together since 2007, 2008, so over a decade. And, we've had some things that have overlapped and we've had plenty of interactions, but it's fun to listen to her talk about not just her journey, but how she's thinking about her role and what she does today, and really the definition for her of what meaningful work is. So that was one that was joyful to listen to. And then the other, which was an interview I did, was with Rajat Bhargava, who's the very entrepreneur who's co-founded the very first company that I made my first angel investment in. And it was an investment that I made in 1994 in a company called NetGenesis. Raj, with a handful of other fraternity brothers of his from MIT, started the company. Raj was 20 or 21. He looked like he was about 14. And today he still looks like he's about 14, which is...
I give him 16, 17.
Yeah, give him 16. But we had a lot of fun talking through both our experiences together, his entrepreneurial journey, what we learned from each other in a mentor-mentee relationship, and some of the other mentors that he had along the way. And then he applied some of the dynamics around Give First to his current company, which is a company called JumpCloud, that's a B2B SaaS company. And I thought he did a really good job of articulating how the principles of Give First, which we generally talk about in the context of people, can also really function in the context of how a company engages with their prospective customers and real customers. And I think it's easy to sort of paint a landscape of freemium models and things like that. But what Raj said was way more profound than that, and gave me a couple of good things for the Give First book that I'm working on that'll come out next year sometime.
A couple of smart cookies there for sure. I learned a ton from listening to that one with Raj as well. And, Heidi, of course, is just a wealth of experience and knowledge. So those are great ones to check out. One of the things I think we've done hopefully pretty well is made sure we got some good balance on the podcast, gender-wise. We also had Janet Bannister of Real up in Canada. She's a fantastic investor. We work very closely with her on a couple of programs, Montreal and Toronto, around the accelerators. And, she talked a lot about just managing her time and just the engine that she has. And I thought there were some really great techniques for people in there about, how they can sort of think about their time and managing it. Because I know that's a problem a lot of entrepreneurs have. Yeah,
another impressive woman who was on the podcast was Elizabeth Krause, who people in and around Boulder, I'm sure, know well. And Elizabeth's been involved in Techstars for a long time, then started an accelerator with her partner, Sue Heidelbrand, called Merge Lane, which is now an investment fund. We were early investors. David, you were an investor in Merge Lane, I think, or at least a mentor in the early programs along with us.
Yep, for sure.
And, watching Elizabeth's own journey and experience has been powerful, but also listening to her reflect on how she approaches funding women-led companies, how she thinks about it now that she's been doing it for a while. She was very, very early on the focus on companies that had at least one female founder, as well as how she went from really not knowing how to think about angel investing or making seed investments to now really having institutionalized the activity and being part of a much larger cohort of both men and women, but especially women who are now investing in early stage startups.
Yeah, and she's got a great podcast of her own that I think you and I have both been on separately that, sort of is about GPs So that's a fun one to listen to as well if you go check out Elizabeth Krauss and learn more about Merge Lane. But you can hear all that in that episode that we had on Give First. Some guy named Jason Mendelson. We have that guy. We shouldn't talk much about him probably.
I enjoyed listening to you and Jason talk about venture deals. Jason and I just came out with the 4th edition of the book Venture Deals: Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist, which we wrote the first edition in 2011. And y'all had really good banter back and forth about not just the book, but a motivation for the book and dynamics around it, sort of how the 4th edition came to be, what's new in it. And it's always a pleasure to listen to the two of you talk, because you've got a great friendship, both working relationship and friendship, that's just fun to observe.
Yeah, we still laugh because we were actually just cracking each other up on that podcast, because we had not planned any of the sort of back and forth that we had around the music stuff at the end. And as you know, Jason's really into music, and we hit a stride there.
You did.
It was a fun one. And then another episode that I think was memorable is Mark Nagar, and we had Dave Meyer on at the same time. So 2 people on, which was sort of a different way of doing it as well, that run a rural venture fund in Colorado. And I know you've been really involved there, but sort of the notion of doing it in an out of the way part of the world, or out of the way places, coming from, Mark, who is obviously super involved in Techstars for a long time. And before that, Startup Weekend and Up Global, helping build all of that up. But, those guys have a very different perspective about, how to find the next interesting companies in the world.
When we did that podcast, I was in Aspen at my place there. Mark was at his place in Telluride, where he lives, and Dave was at his place in Carbondale. And the sort of fascination that I had looking back on it was the sort of meta-ness of what we were doing, right? We're talking about building startup communities in cities that were not mainstream places and that were part of effectively rural Colorado, or probably more correct, non-urban Colorado, right? Those places that both Mark and Dave have focused on are outside of the Front Range. And I would say Mark in particular has really spent a huge amount of time intellectually trying to understand what to do and how to build communities in these rural areas. And Dave has been an incredible practitioner of it, as has Mark. And the two of them together and sort of playing off each other on what they both learned separately and from things that they've done that overlap is pretty powerful.
So I'm going to guess that some of that's going to end up in your refreshed Startup Communities book.
Maybe. Yeah, startup. Well, there's 2 books, right? There's Startup Community Way, which is a sequel to Startup Communities. That's being delivered to the publisher on Friday afternoon. So it'll be published April, May at the latest. And at the same time, I'm coming out with a 2nd edition of Startup Communities, which includes a bunch of refreshes on different things that were in the 1st edition, as well as some things that I just fundamentally got wrong or punted on, and some tie-ins to Startup Community Way. So good foreshadowing. And for those of you that are following what Techstars is doing, it hasn't been announced yet. I don't know if it'll be announced by the time this podcast comes out, but if it hasn't, if you think about Techstars and you think about books, there will be something that connects the two together in an interesting way.
Well, you're just full of teases. People are going to be happy they're listening to this sort of recap edition.
Think of all the advanced information you get.
Oh my gosh, we should make a habit of that. So people should always want to listen to this one, because we give them a little preview, a little sneak peek. Around the corner into next year, I know we have a few guests, or into this year now, lined up,
but not the new decade yet.
Correct, just the old decade still, the last year of the current decade, as you would say it. I have Philip McKernan coming up. That should be out soon. Philip's become a good friend of mine. A lot of people in our community know Jerry Colonna as an amazing CEO coach and partnership coach. Philip is sort of the equivalent of that and sort of life coach for individuals, and really fun discussion with him that I'm looking forward to getting out into the world soon.
Another one coming is with Len Fassler. Len was the co-chairman of the company that bought my first company. And he and I then subsequently did a couple of other companies together. Len's in his late 80s, but he's incredible and really the person that much of my own learning around business and business deals, how to do acquisitions, how to do investments, how to treat people, how to really think long-term, and frankly, how to approach things from a mentor perspective and Give First came from. So it was a real delight to spend some time with Len. We had a couple of other people from Techstars there that are involved, Jenny Lawton and Frank Alfano, both who have been involved in companies with Len and I in the past. And hopefully that one will be out pretty soon.
I'm looking forward to that one too. So I think, what have we learned, Brad? 20 podcasts in, it's not very many, but I think we've learned that you got to do a little bit of work ahead of it. Harry Stebbings taught us that from 20 Minute VC, right? You got to maybe talk to some people that know that person, get some good content because you only have about 20 minutes. I have gotten some feedback, by the way, that people want longer ones. They say sometimes you're just getting into the good stuff and the podcast is over. I'd love to hear an hour. I don't know if most people feel that way, but I've heard that a lot.
Curious for people's feedback. I think a few of the ones that I've done have stretched to about 30 minutes, and I don't feel like we've run out of. We don't. Yeah, right. We don't run out of gas at 20 or 30 minutes, but it feels like a bite-sized chunk. Like that's enough. I mean, another thing we learned is you just got to do it, like so many other things, and get comfortable with it. I think it took me, I don't know, the first 10 or so before I really felt like I had any sort of rhythm while we were doing it. The first couple we tried to do together, and that was a debacle. Having two moderators and one guest was really hard. Having one moderator and two guests, which we tried with Mark and Dave, we'll probably do that again. That worked pretty well. And the other thing I learned was a little bit of pre-work with the guest. Some of them will listen to all the podcasts or the last couple of podcasts in advance. Some won't, but helping them understand that it's not about a specific, like, I want to get this one or these 2 points across, but kind of here's the place we want to wander around in, and let's just have a conversation. Really changes the tempo a lot versus it being this stiff, like, here are the questions we want to get to.
Totally. It's much more fun when it's a real conversation back and forth. And I've had fun doing that with you, Brad. I hope people look forward to the next 20 or so podcasts. We'll probably be back before then with a little recap again, but hope everybody has an awesome 2020 and a year from now looks forward to a new decade. And
I think our goal will be to do another 20 before the end of the decade.
Oh yeah, that should be no problem. We're on a pace to far exceed that. Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you do have feedback, ideas for guests, if you want longer podcasts, shorter podcasts, or no podcasts at all, email us at podcasts@techstars.com. And of course, check out and subscribe to the podcast at givefirst.techstars.com if you haven't already done that. Thanks for listening.
Before we started, David told me that he's already tired of people wishing him Happy New Year. So Happy New Year. Thanks for listening to the show today. We'd love to hear your feedback, ideas, or any person that you'd love to hear from on Give First. Please also leave us a rating and review and reach out to us at podcasts@techstars.com, or you can reach me on Twitter @bfeld. See you next time, and don't forget to always give first.